We're now turning to the Richland City Council races. So running for City Council Position 1 are Kaylin Finn, Bob Thompson, and Wendy Warner. A fourth candidate, Ms. Lillian Randy Slovic, is also on the ballot running for this position, but she's unable to attend tonight due to a previous commitment. She has, however, sent a friend, Phyllis Baxter, to read a statement on her behalf. So, Ms. Baxter, let's hear your opening statement.
Good evening. This statement was provided by Ms. Slovic. I am sorry I can't be here tonight. I want to thank the League of Women Voters for having this forum and for allowing Phyllis Baxter to read a statement for me. Many of you have met me already, as I have enjoyed talking to hundreds of you on my walks through neighborhoods, during my visits to the farmers market, and during community events like Cool Desert Nights. Thank you for your patience and the information and advice you have offered me. Everyone agrees that we have a wonderful community filled with kind people. People who love living here naturally want to make the city even better. We have shared concerns that accommodating automobile traffic has taken precedent over the safety of our children, other pedestrians, and bikers. Many of us are frustrated that Richland has no city core and no real identity. I know that rising rents and home prices are squeezing many people and that city taxes impact everybody. That's why I believe that increasing the tax base by having successful businesses in the city core is so important. Working together, we can solve these problems and build on the wonderful things we already have to make a better city. As a legislative director to a U.S. congressman, I have worked on transportation issues, rural development, natural resources, military, and veterans affairs. I can bring new ideas, enthusiasm, and energy to the Richland City Council, and I firmly believe that walking through neighborhoods and talking to residents is every bit as important as attending regularly scheduled meetings. If I am elected, I will continue my neighborhood visits. I will look forward to sharing ideas with more of you in the days ahead. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Phyllis, for being here. Now we'll begin with opening statements for our candidates who are here. Mr. Finn, you filed first.
All right. Okay, can everybody hear me? See how close I got to talk into this thing. All right, so, all right, I'm Kaylin Finn. I was born here. I graduated Richland High. Actually was born down the street from where I graduated, so I've gone real far. The furthest I've gone is college. I went to Central Washington University. I picked up a bachelor's degree in political science from there. Then I came back. So I grew up on the Queensgate side of Richland, and now I live over by Jason Lee, so I live on this side of Richland. So it's kind of given me a unique perspective. I've been able to live over there, live over here. I've gone to, Richland Public Schools. It's one of those things where I've been watching growing up, and I've been paying attention, and I've been seeing how Richland's been growing, and I've been seeing the things that have been being implemented. And I've always seen that there's room for a new vision, there's room for new solutions, there's room for fresh perspective. And I think that's something that I want to include people in. I think that's one of the things I've noticed is a lot of people, and talking with people, there's frustrations that they don't feel included or heard. And I've shared in those frustrations. And that's one of those things that I want to be there for people, I want to be there for you guys, and I want it to be an us thing rather than an I thing. And it's one of those things where I think we need, transparency, and we need leadership. So leadership's one of those things where it's one of those things that you strive to make good decisions, because leadership to me isn't a position or a title, it's action and example. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Thompson.
Thank you. I want to thank everybody for coming out this evening. It's a lot better than 2 years ago when it was about 95 and everybody was melting down. I've been doing this for a while, and so I'll just give you kind of a brief biography, I guess. So I was born here, went to Richland High School, graduated from Washington State, then law school at Willamette. Came back after my dad got sick to kind of help out around the home. Raised a family, had 4 kids that went through Richland High School. And I spent about a half of my adult life trying to help this community become a better community from how I saw it. Richland was always blessed with bright people. I mean, you got to hear a little bit about that during the school board. I mean, we had a pretty high education level, a lot of bright people. And we had some challenges along the way, but we actually have done a lot of things pretty well. A lot of the questions that I heard in the school board and what we need to address are some of the economic factors I think people lose sight of. First off, Richland's cost of living is cheaper than anywhere else in the Tri-Cities, both from electric, water, sewer, all that, and it comes because people paid attention to those sort of things. My focus has kind of been on Hanford issues more than a lot of other issues, and I look at that because 2/3 of our disposable income is generated out at the Hanford side. So how did I get better at that? So I started a group called the Energy Community Alliance. I run the Hanford communities, and I find myself in a place finally where a voice can be heard to actually make a difference on Hanford cleanup issues. And frankly, that's kind of something we don't ever talk about, and it's so vitally important for everybody out there. Just one last quick comment. This election has nothing to do with the people up here. It has everything to do with who you are and your community. Understand that we can make a good informed choice, because I think you got great candidates, and that's the end.
Thank you. Ms. Warner.
Good evening. My name's Wendy Warner, and I will just start by saying, like you heard from a school board candidate earlier, I'm not a politician, and I'm also not a long-term Richland resident. I was raised in Iowa, and then my family moved to North Idaho. I went from there to Alaska, then to Minneapolis, Minnesota, and 10 years ago, I decided to make Richland my home. I have family members who've been here since way back in the 1940s, so it's not that I'm not familiar with the area, but I'm fairly new to Richland in compared to my
The old guys.
the other candidates up here. So I don't have a history, but I'm looking at the future. And I plan to retire in this community, and I also have public sector experience, having worked for the city of Walla Walla previously and now for Benton Franklin Transit. I understand the inner workings and some of the challenges of the agencies and the municipalities that are facing this tremendous growth that we expect. And I have a diverse background and appreciate diversity. My career has been primarily in human resources over 30 years. My bachelor's is in marketing and PR. And with the experience of working with people and serving people as a servant leader, understanding what employees need, what their community needs, what their employers need to support them, I believe there's a lot of potential for Richland. And I appreciate Hanford, but I think we can grow bigger.
Thank you. We'll now move on to the questions. Again, you'll have 1.5 minutes. Mr. Finn, you'll go first, and I do have several audience questions once again, so let's take one from them. Bill Lamson recently conducted an experiment using a wheelchair to see the accessibility of Richland. There were issues. What would you do to make Richland more accessible to the differently abled?
Okay, so that's a really great question. And I actually saw that video, and I immediately donated after I watched it because it was that impactful. I would recommend that everybody do the same if they have the means to see it. It's one of those things where I think they were trying to get into several buildings around over here, and it's true. I mean, I live over by kind of Jason Lee. There's sidewalks that they'll go for a little while and they kind of end. I've seen electric wheelchairs in the road. And we can do better than that. And having a few friends that are wheelchair bound, I understand the situations that they encounter on a daily basis, and it's tough. And I know, me personally, I would have a hard time, navigating the city if I was using a wheelchair. I run into situations like that all the time. There's not a lot of the doors, in public buildings that have the automatic door opening system. There's no real ramps per se. There's no, easily navigatable sidewalks. I think that's something that we need to pay more attention to. I think it's something we need to advocate for, and I think it's something that we have committees. There's the a disabilities committee, I believe, that that we can lean on for more inputs on this sort of thing, that we can really, set aside some funds to go and tackle some of these issues. And I think that's something that we really, really, really do need to pay attention to, and really need to listen to those people, because they are some of the more vulnerable amongst us. So thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Thompson.
I think Kaylin said it really well. The idea of taking a disadvantaged person and excluding them from the rest of the community is kind of horrific, isn't it? Your heart not only goes out, but the stress, the animosity that you feel for yourself when you, in essence, are hurting other individuals, maybe not intentionally, strikes us all, doesn't it? There are laws, ADA compliance laws, that from a legal perspective drive legal requirements. Cities and communities, counties and states do their best to follow the rules, but those come at a cost as well. So, one of the reasons why we decided to do a new city hall is because it had nothing to do with ADA compliance, right? So I'm an attorney, and there's ways, litigation solves a lot of issues, costs a lot of money. And what it does is it drives people to come up with the right answer before you get sued. City of Richland it took them 25 years, but finally bit the bullet to do what was right for its citizens, all of its citizens. And I don't think there's anybody here on this dais or anybody out there in the community who would disagree with any of those thoughts. It is something that took too long to do. It's something we're trying to do better at. And all we can do is, whoever gets this position, follow through. Make the community accessible for everybody.
Thank you. Ms. Warner.
I agree with Mr. Thompson that accessibility for everybody is important. Working at Ben Franklin Transit, that has given me a unique perspective on accessibility in this community and the ability for people to reach and access health care, vital neighborhood support, grocery stores, family, places of worship, and not having accessibility is an important and unfortunate situation for some of the people who are differently abled. We do have a community action network in the community that works with Ben Franklin Transit and with people with access concerns. And they also work with Ben Franklin COG, the BF COG, to look at development within the cities, when there's new development, when there's reconstruction, how we can ensure that there's curbside access, that there's access for wheelchairs, and that people would be able to get to the places that they need to go. And so as this community grows, that does need to be a focus for everyone. And I agree with Mr. Thompson that there is an investment. With the Americans with Disabilities Act, there's some retrofitting that might need to happen, but in order to be open and to be inclusive and to embrace a diverse community, we need to be able to make the investments that allow us to do that and to be the best city that we can be for everyone.
Thank you. Mr. Thompson, you'll go first on this next question. City council positions have traditionally been nonpartisan races. This year, some candidates are being endorsed or recommended by a political party. Do you think this is helpful in light of the partisan politics on the national stage?
I think we live in a pretty difficult world right now. Politics has become kind of a blood sport in a lot of ways. And it wasn't that way in the city of Richland. It started 2 years ago, okay? And so, I'm not here to cast aspersion on anybody because they have a right to their First Amendment rights, but don't think that that didn't happen. And there's a natural, anytime there's an action, there's a reaction, kind of a basic physics principle, and it certainly happens in politics. And so you see that happening in local governments. And there's been a real push, frankly, with the election of Trump for people that were very dissatisfied with that. And, I don't care whether you support him or don't, that's not the point. It is boiled down to a local level. And I think that some of the animosity gets away from what we're supposed to do. This is a nonpartisan race. Your water, your sewer, your fire, and police really don't have a whole hell of a lot to do with politics. They really don't. But yet we find ourselves throwing ourselves and spending a lot of energy on issues that cities don't get involved in. In my view, we're not very good at, okay? Social issue program solving, government has done a terrible job for the last 70 years doing that. But we continue to think, even on a micro level like the city of Richland or Kennewick, that we can solve the world's problems here. We're not very well set. We're happy when we can actually get you safe, keep you safe, have your water or sewer to get delivered, and provide you with opportunities like this and venues like this to have a more livable life. And that's what we do better than just about anything. And politics get in the way.
Ms. Warner.
It's hard for me to think that this would be a partisan position because we have a community of people from all backgrounds and all political persuasions. So if this position is about serving the city of Richland, then it needs to be about serving everybody and not about serving a political platform or personal motivation. It should be about taking care of the community, providing the services that individuals cannot otherwise provide for themselves. Working with the city employees who are making recommendations about how to improve access, how to improve availability, how to ensure that the infrastructure and the zoning and the needs of the city and the community are taken care of. And that's really not a political issue, that's a service issue to me.
Thank you. Mr. Finn.
Yeah, so I would agree with that. I think it's important that in municipal government, so that's one of the things that they kind of hammered into you, and in my degree was political science, was municipal government's nonpartisan for a reason. It's because you need to be focusing on policies, not ideologies. And that goes back to representation. So every citizen of this community has different beliefs, different ideologies, different political party affiliations. And I think it's important that a city council, they've got to be able to listen to every single one of you and represent every single one of you and do that in a way that isn't political. And I think that's very important because when you start doing that at a municipal level, I think that's kind of when it all starts kind of breaking down. And I think we need to stick to the keeping it municipal or keeping it nonpartisan, and focus on true representation. I think a lot of times we get lost in the weeds on that. Especially at council levels, I've seen it becomes a competition of one versus the other. And I don't think that's right, because I think ultimately, then you guys kind of lose out sometimes, because you'll have somebody that won't listen to you if they know how you might vote, nationally, et cetera. So I think, that was a great question. And I think it's something that we need to be mindful of. Thanks.
Thank you. Question 3, Ms. Warner, you will go first. And once again, we'll take an audience question. What is your stance on open public bargaining, specifically between the city and collective bargaining units?
I'm glad I got to hear some of the answers from the candidates for the school board earlier. I have to say right now, I am the chief spokesperson and negotiator for Ben Franklin Transit, and we have 5 open collective bargaining agreements. So I'm right in the thick of it. And I understand both sides. I understand that there is an interest in taxpayers being able to observe the process and perhaps even add commentary or suggestions to the bargaining session. But I also understand that from the perspective of the union, that could complicate matters, and they're there to talk about their jobs and their job future and job security. And so I think there might actually be an alternative rather than open bargaining. Perhaps there could be an open initial meeting. If the public, if the taxpayers feel strongly that this is something they need to see without watching the entire bargaining process, and Jay Clough, his comments about being in there when you're asking for a raise, I can resonate with that, and I think our employees would resonate with that. I know that from the union's perspective, that's not something that they welcome, and it could complicate matters, but perhaps there could be some initial dialogue about the intentions of the negotiators on both sides of the table, and that could be done in a public setting or be an open forum, and then go into closed bargaining where the process then plays out.
Thank you. Mr. Finn.
So I would have to agree with Wendy on that one a lot. So working out at Hanford, you do see a lot of CBAs, you collective bargaining agreement, things like that, and there is benefits to them, being closed doors. But I do think that there, an initial meeting could be, transparent and public, and then they could discuss finer details, in a closed door settings where they could feel comfortable bringing stuff up and such without people kind of judging them or eyeballing them or anything like that. So I think that I think both could win on that. I think that's a good thing, and I would agree with that.
Thank you. Mr. Thompson.
You know, this is one that somebody asked me, a very conservative person asked me about this issue, and I think they were talking about city managers and salaries. And I think it's more complicated than people think. And maybe just because I've been doing this for a while, and if you get involved in negotiations, part of negotiations is where you start and where you end up, right? And so your first initial position certainly isn't going to be your last. And you don't like to give away your total position. You don't want to let everybody know what you have up front. And the idea of having that have in a public setting is fraught with difficulty. It's more complicated than that too, because in the city, police and fire have mandatory arbitration clauses, okay? And so whether it's even legal to do that is maybe a broader question. But I want you to think about trying to get the best deal you can for whoever side you are, and then you get the public to get involved and chime in. Are you listening to what's best for the community? Are you looking for what's best for perhaps a union member? Are you looking at what's best for the bottom line? And there's a trade-off, isn't there? When you become public with what your negotiations are, the point on one side is to drive the cost down. There's an impact on your community when you do that, right? You may get less service. You may get less qualified individuals. And so I understand the transparency thing, but be careful what you ask for, because you may not like the net result at the end of the day.
Thank you. Moving on to our final question. Once again, your answers will be limited to 1 minute this time. Mr. Finn, you have the honor of going first. Would you like to see more commercial development along the river? Why or why not?
Okay, we're good? All right. So that's a little bit of a complex question, but not at the same time. And let me explain. Growing up here, the parks were one of my most favorite things. Okay, going to the park, we go with our friends. There's trails down there. You can easy access to the river, to the shore, and everything like that. At the same time, our city, we benefit from drawing people in, from business, small business, investments, everything like that. It would be one of those things where, for me, I would only advocate for it or only be okay with it if it was something that could be incorporated into the the shoreline or down by the river. If it was something that was going to take up space or eliminate an area for people to use, I wouldn't be as okay with it as some others may be. And I think it's important, our natural spaces and our open areas and our parks, those are Richland's gems, and I think we need to protect those as best we can. Thanks.
Thank you. Mr. Thompson.
That's a great struggle question, isn't it? Cities die when they don't grow. To grow, you need economic development. The city's been blessed, believe it or not, we got like 38 miles of river shore in the city of Richland. That includes both Columbia and the Yakima Delta. And we own most of it, right? And there are limitations on what you can do in regards to shoreline development. They got state rules on a lot of these things. So when you look out there and you see what we were able to do on Columbia Point, I think that was a kind of a win-win for the community and didn't really horrify individuals in regards to access to the river. The city's always had a vision, or at least the council has a vision, which we got input from the citizens on, was to take this downtown area and move it towards the river, became continuous, where you could have easy access to walk. There was a part of the project was the idea of maybe having the farmer's market down there. Now, is that commercial development? Maybe, but it's a tough question. It's a balance. I think we've done a pretty good job on the balance so far.
Thank you. Ms. Warner.
It is a tough question, and it's a dialogue that I've heard in the past 10 years that I've been here about what are the cities doing with the shoreline. We have this wonderful resource, and are we maximizing it? And could we make the cities, and I'm not just saying Richland, but the region, more desirable to people moving into the area if the shoreline was developed with more amenities, more services, more access? And I know that that's a complex question, and the Corps of Engineers have managed that for a long time. I know there's some First Nations concerns about who really should have the stewardship of that land. And yet we also hear from people that are moving into the community that this is something that they think is amiss and that it hasn't been maximized to the best interest of the community. So is there an easy answer? There's no easy answer. I think what Richland has done has been a fantastic job down at Columbia Point. Are there perhaps opportunities that within the current zoning could be evaluated? Those possibly could.
Thank you, and thank you to all three of you candidates for being here tonight. Again, vying for a spot on Richland City Council, Position 1, Kaylin Finn, Bob Thompson, and Wendy Warner.